How do I use the chronological chart of Bible books? In our previous study, I suggested the chronological chart of Bible books should be used as a navigational tool as you journey through the books of the Bible. For this study, I like to explain how the chart works so that you can proficiently use it as a guide. There's two charts, one for the Old Testament and another for the New Testament. Let's begin with the Old Testament books. Allow me to give an explanation of the color coding scheme. This will help you more easily identify the information on the chart. The color purple highlights the books of the Bible. The color blue highlights the number of chapters for each book, along with any Bible texts that are referenced. The color green highlights the length of time it takes to read the book in a single sitting. The color orange highlights the time period covered by each book, and the color yellow highlights any explanatory notes for the chart. Now notice, at the bottom of the chart is a timeline or time box, beginning with the creation of the world in 4004 BC and ending with the book of Malachi in 397 BC. The historic narrative recorded in the Old Testament, therefore, covers a period of 3,607 years. Each book of the Old Testament is given its own box. Within each box, I have given the number of chapters, the length of time it takes to read the book in a single sitting, and for some of the books, such as the prophets, I have given the corresponding scriptures where those prophets fit within the Old Testament narrative. Each book is positioned along the timeline in chronological order. Above each box are the years covered by that book. For example, the record of Genesis begins in 4004 BC and ends in 1635 BC, covering a total of 2,369 years. The record of Exodus begins in 1635 BC and ends in 1491 BC, covering a total of 145 years. The record of Numbers begins in 1491 BC and ends in 1452 BC, covering a total of 39 years, and so on. I have given the years covered by each of those historic narratives for the books of the Old Testament. You'll notice that some books, such as Job, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Ruth, are given dates at the bottom of their boxes. This represents the approximate year the events of that book occurred. It's for that reason these books are aligned with Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, and Judges, respectively, as their narratives occurred within those time frames. The same is true of 1st and 2nd Chronicles. These books recount the same period of history recorded in Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Joshua, Judges, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, and 2 Kings. Henceforth, when reading through the Bible chronologically, we begin with the book of Genesis, then that of Job, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and so on. 1st and 2nd Chronicles may be read after 2 Kings. We then have, under the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st Kings, and 1st Chronicles, a period of history known as the United Kingdom of Israel. This is between the years 1095 BC and 975 BC. This section is enclosed by the dotted lines, which I've highlighted for the on-screen notes in the color red. There were 3 kings during this period, each sitting on the throne for 40 years: Saul, David, and Solomon. King David wrote many of the Psalms, and King Solomon was the author of 3 books: the Song of Solomon, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. The dotted line, or the red line on this online chart, on the right side, it's positioned under 1st Kings and 2nd Chronicles, indicating the end of the United Kingdom of Israel. You see, after King Solomon died in the year 975 BC, there was a split. The Jewish people divided into 2 separate nations. And for the continuation of the timeline, we must move to the top of the chart, where the divided kingdom of Israel is marked. Beginning in the year 975 BC, so that the timeline continues from this point in the biblical record, and we're going to continue that here. I'm simply out of space on an A4 sheet of paper to extend the chart longer, so I've had to place this section of the timeline on top of the other. And so our timeline continues at the top with in 975 BC, the northern kingdom retained the name Israel and was made up of 10 of the 12 tribes. Its capital was Samaria. It had a total of 19 kings. It was taken captive by the Assyrians in 721 BC and therefore survived as a kingdom for only 256 years. There are 3 books of prophecy which fit into the time frame of Israel's history: Jonah, Amos, and Hosea. The end of the northern kingdom came in 721 BC, when they were conquered by Assyria. On the other hand, the southern kingdom took the name Judah and was made up of the remaining 2 tribes. Its capital was Jerusalem. It had a total of 20 kings. It was taken captive by the Babylonians in 588 BC, and therefore survived as a kingdom for 308 years. Now, there are 8 books of prophecy which fit into the time frame of Judah's history: Joel, Isaiah, Micah, Nahum, Zephaniah, Jeremiah, Habakkuk, and Lamentations. Now, Although Judah was taken captive by the Babylonians in 588 BC, this was not the end of the kingdom. The timeline continues with a 70-year exile period when Judah was in captivity to the Babylonians. And there are 3 books of prophecy which fit within this time frame: Daniel, Ezekiel, and Obadiah. After this time, the Jewish people slowly returned to Jerusalem, rebuilding the city and the temple. And that history is recorded in Ezra and Nehemiah, with Esther fitting into the time frame of Ezra. There are 3 books of prophecies which fit within this time frame: Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And this, of course, brings us to the end of the Old Testament books. And I believe your journey through the books of the Old Testament will be much more profitable and enjoyable if you read them in chronological order with a timeline before you. Let's now look at the New Testament books. The color coding scheme is the same for the New Testament. The color purple highlights the books of the Bible. The color blue highlights the number of chapters for each book, along with any Bible texts that are referenced. The color green highlights the length of time it takes to read the book in a single sitting. The color orange highlights the time period covered by that book. And the color yellow highlights explanatory notes for the chart. Notice at the bottom of the chart is a timeline or time box, beginning with the birth of Christ in 4 BC and ending with the book of the Revelation around 100 AD. Each book of the New Testament is given its own box. Within each box, I have given the number of chapters, along with the length of time it takes to read the book in a single sitting. For many of the books, such as the epistles, I've also given the author and the place where the letter was written, along with the corresponding scriptures where those letters fit within the book of Acts. Each book is positioned along the timeline in chronological order. Notice the dotted lines at the top and running down the length of the page. I'm going to highlight this on screen with the color red. These lines divide the history of the New Testament into 3 equal sections. There's first the Gospel records, covering a period of 33 years. Second, the book of Acts and 11 epistles, covering another period of 33 years. And then, third, that history which occurred after the book of Acts, along with the remaining 11 epistles, covering a period of 33 years. Looking first at the first time period, we have the 4 gospel records: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These books record the history of Christ's earthly ministry, along with the origin of the church. For the second time period, we have a basic outline of the book of Acts, together with the time period. Each section of the book covers. The book of Acts records the history of Christ's heavenly ministry together with the growth and multiplication of the church. But it isn't until we get to Acts chapters 12 through 15 that the first New Testament letter was written, that of James. And then between Acts chapters 18 through 28, the Apostle Paul wrote 10 letters. 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Romans, Ephesians, Colossians, Philemon, and Philippians. For the third time period, we have the remaining 11 epistles. 1 Peter, Jude, 1 Timothy, Titus, Hebrews, 2 Timothy, 2 Peter, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, and the Revelation. Of course, these letters were written after the historic narrative recorded in the book of Acts, and I therefore provide on this chart a few explanatory notes to give some historic context surrounding these letters. This then brings us to the end of the New Testament books. And so, these are the chronological charts of the Old and New Testament scriptures, which I recommend you use when reading through the books of the Bible. To be clear, you start with the book of Genesis, and you systematically work your way through each book as it appears along the timeline. And as it should be your goal to read one book of the Bible per week, and to read it in a single sitting, you have the benefit of knowing the approximate time it will take you to do that, because I've provided that information in the designated box. But wait a minute, you say. I don't have the time to read one whole book of the Bible per week, especially in a single sitting. Just look at how long it takes to read the book of Genesis, 3.5 hours. There's just no way I can squeeze that into my schedule. Oh, my dear friend, I don't believe that's entirely true. While it is true that you'll be required to make some significant changes in your weekly schedule, yet surely you'll admit it is possible to set apart 3.5 hours at some point in the week in order to read through the book of Genesis. I mean, look at it this way. You're sometimes asked to meet up with friends for dinner during a weeknight, right? Well, you seem to have little trouble squeezing that social outing into your weekly schedule. When you do go out with your friends on a weeknight, you're looking at being out for 3 to 5 hours on average. Now, if you can set aside that much time to meet with your friends, is it really beyond possibility for you to set aside that much time to meet with the Lord by reading through the book of Genesis? In any case, the book of Genesis happens to be one of the longest books of the Bible. For most weeks, it will take you far less time to read a Bible book. My dear friends, if you desire to be built up in the faith, there are no shortcuts. Neither are there any substitutes for the Word of God. I therefore want to encourage you, get into the Scriptures. And don't just toy around with the Bible by reading a couple of chapters each day. Rather, take the Word of God seriously by reading an entire book in one sitting. It will feed your soul and refresh your spirit.